I think the whole accent thing is really funny. You know, when she's in New York, she like doesn't have an accent. And then when she goes home,
Right.
she's like, this is where I grew up in my hometown. Who are you?
Yeah.
Welcome to Rom-Com Bomb, a sex ed with DB podcast series where in every episode we go under the covers with a beloved rom-com, strip away its hidden toxic messages, and rewrite the script on love and sex. I'm about to get personal here, so listen up. I'm going to tell you a fun fact about me that you definitely didn't know. The lube that I use most consistently is Uber Lube. I really mean it. If you were here with me right now, I'd tell you to go over to my nightstand drawer and tell me what you see. That's right, you would see a bottle of Uber Lube. If you've never heard of Uber Lube, let me tell you about it. Uber Lube is a silky smooth silicone-based lube recommended by leading doctors, and its body-friendly ingredient list makes it widely used by people with sensitivities to lubricants. Another amazing thing about Uber Lube is that it doesn't leave a sticky residue like water-based lubes do. It lasts for a long time and doesn't stain clothing or bedding. I have 3 bottles of Uber Lube on my bedside table right now, ready when I need it. If you're someone who wants to feel more pleasure in the bedroom, use code SEXEDWITHDB for 10% off at uberlube.com. If you've been wanting more intentional time with your partner but don't want the hassle of spending a lot of money for a fancy date night, look no further. Aria has you covered. Aria is a service for couples that makes it easy to break out of routine, deepen emotional connection, and energize their relationship with curated experiences called scenes. I recently did one called Heat, and I could not recommend it enough. Prioritizing intimacy with your partner is essential, and Aria makes it easy. Visit arya.fyi and use code SEXEDWITHDB for 15% off now. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of Rom-Com Bomb. I'm your host, DB, sex educator, pleasure expert, and rom-com critic. And this week, we're heading down south for a rom-com that's all about runway brides, small town charm, and the idea that you can never really escape where you came from. But this movie also raises some big questions about power imbalances in these relationships, the pressure to conform, and who really gets a happy ending in these stories. And to help us break it all down, we are joined by Becca Rea-Tucker, a reproductive rights advocate, baker, and author who merges activism with dessert through her platform, The Sweet Feminist. Becca, welcome to Rom-Com Bomb. How are you doing?
Hi there. I'm really excited to be here today. This is my dream podcast to come on. I can talk
Oh
about
my.
rom-coms all day, so I am psyched.
Yes, we're so happy
Yeah.
to have you. And like I said before we just started recording, I've been following your amazing baking abortion videos for a very long time. And for those of you who haven't heard of The Sweet Feminist, Becca does all sorts of content, but content I feel like I've seen most often is you baking something very delicious and then talking about why abortion is so necessary and why we need abortion healthcare rights advocacy. And so I love the pairing of those two.
Yes, me too. I don't think you have to choose between your interests, so I do both and I love it. Yeah.
It's a both end situation. And yeah, for the trivia teaser, actually, for this film, we'll learn more about this at the end of the episode. But this movie was the first production allowed to film inside the flagship NYC Tiffany's since a certain Hollywood classic over 40 years earlier. Stick around to find out which iconic film came before it. But today we are reviewing Sweet Home Alabama. Becca, what is your relationship to this film? Tell me.
So I love Sweet Home Alabama. I have seen this movie hundreds of times, at least dozens of times, maybe hundreds.
Same.
I remember growing up watching this at my grandma's house in one of those, I don't know, 14-inch televisions with a VCR.
Oh, yeah.
So I have had a long-standing love for this movie. And I know we're doing a rewatch, but it doesn't feel quite like a rewatch to me since I've seen it so many times. But
Exactly.
we'll talk about that.
Yes, I completely agree. I've definitely watched this a ton growing up. It was like always on the movie channels on my TV when I would get home from school. And I think I owned it on DVD. I just loved it. I just loved Reese Witherspoon. I loved the whole love triangle situation of it all. It was, yeah, from 2002. So we're talking 23 years ago. And it came out off the back of Legally Blonde, which we also have done on this podcast. And so yeah, Reese has made multiple appearances on Rom-Com Bomb here. Um, but for those of you who haven't seen it recently, here is a quick refresh. Sweet Home Alabama follows Melanie, Reese Witherspoon, a rising fashion designer in NYC who gets engaged to the mayor's son but has a small problem. She's still married to her childhood sweetheart, Jake. She heads back to Alabama to finalize the divorce, but old feelings resurface, leading to a messy, sentimental love triangle between her past and her future. We're going to transition now to our segment As a Kid. And I'm wondering from you, Becca, what is maybe like one word when you're watching this film at your grandma's that describes like your relationship to this film when you were younger?
I thought it was the height of romance, like this childhood love element, revisiting that childhood love. That felt very powerful to me as a child, because
Mhm.
I hadn't, of course, experienced grown-up love at all, but I had, I'm sure experienced some form of, childhood crush or affection, and that was reflected in the movie for me.
Yes. So we're going with height dash of dash romance. All one word, height of romance, peak romance. Um, yeah, I would maybe say like comfort. I don't know. I just was very comforted by her like going back to her home and like even though she was ashamed of where she came from, question mark, she still like, got to adopt the accent back and just kind of fell right back into the routine with her high school friends and it just felt very familiar and comfortable. And what scene do you think defined this movie for you?
I think it's the scene when she's, walking up to the house that they used to share, for the first time, like demanding that Jake sign these divorce papers. I think that sticks in your head. Um,
What about that, like, feels like you remember that?
I love her power of storming in there and being like, "You need to sign these fucking papers," and
Right.
he's, this, like, I think, beautiful man being like, "No, I love you so much that I'm not gonna sign these papers." I remember
Oh,
that
boy, is that still your take many years later?
it's not my take anymore, but I do
Okay.
remember that being my take
Right, as a child.
as a child, yes.
Yeah. I think for me, the scene that really defines this film, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, is kind of like the 2 scenes, I guess, of her as a kid kissing him as a 10-year-old when, like, lightning is striking in the beginning, and she says, "What do you wanna marry me for anyhow?" And he says, "So I can kiss you anytime I want." Yikes. I think as an adult, I'm just like, "Oh, don't love that."
Mm.
Uh,
No, not into that at all, no.
no, it's
That is
yeah.
not what marriage means, first of all.
Somebody needs to tell this child, but then they bring it back around where as adults, it's kind of like tongue in cheek because he says, "What do you wanna marry me for anyhow?" And she says, "So I can kiss you anytime I want." So it is a cutie little thing that they say to each other. But I do think that at the time it was romantic and now it just feels, like there's no consent and that's feels scary to say to someone else. What do you think works about this film? Like, what do you like about it, all these years later?
I like that it's, trying to merge these 2 worlds, Melanie's intention with her former self, her current self, her future self, what that's going to look like, and I think that's really compelling to watch her try to balance those elements, and make them somehow fit together, which she ultimately does in the end. I think people sometimes don't realize this, that they do split their time between Tuscaloosa and New York City. It's not like Melanie has, given up her dream to move back home to live in Alabama.
Yes, I was literally gonna talk about this. I had seen the credits for the first time, I feel like, when I did the rewatch last night, and we see these, like this series of pictures and GIF-like videos where Jake is in New York City with Melanie, and both of them have their careers, and she's a designer, and he's a glass company owner, and they have a daughter, and so it feels very much like she doesn't have to give up her work and her life for him.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, Becca, we are transitioning to the rating before the rewatch. I asked you to rate the film before we rewatch it so we can compare a pre and post watch ratings. but let's go over the rating system of 1 to 5 VOMs. So 1 VOM is it's dated, but it's mostly harmless. 5 VOMs, full body cringe, did not age well. Let's burn all the VHSs and DVDs of this film. What did you rate the film before the rewatch?
I rated it a 2. I think all rom-coms have some element of vom, especially the ones that we're revisiting, decades later. So I think it's pretty minimal. I like a lot of the themes that come out in this
Mm-hmm.
in this movie. Um Obviously there's stuff in there that is truly bomb as
Yes.
well, but for me it's a 2. What about you?
I think I rated it a 3 because I kind of just remember feeling like I didn't like the way that Jake treated her, like, throughout the time that they're together, and I hated the idea that he kept sending the divorce papers back. I think to me, like, that was enough for me to feel like, "Oh, like, this is abusive." Like, I don't
Yeah,
like this at all. And actually, that's our first thing I wanna talk about in our next segment called That's Problematic, where we go through what exactly is going on in this film that's not so great. And the first thing I wanna talk about is the category of manipulation masked as love. And this is very present in a lot of rom-coms that we've covered, specifically when it comes, to, oh, like Matthew McConaughey making a bet, in order to, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, or, her writing an article about him, or like Hitch, like you have to like pretend like you're cooler than you are in order to get someone to love you, or trick them into knowing, that you pay attention to them, or whatever it is. And I think in this film, Jake refuses to sign the divorce papers, essentially forcing Melanie to stay in Alabama longer than she planned to. Throughout the past 7 years, presumably, he's been sending the papers back over and over again. And his stubbornness is kind of framed as like charming and romantic, kind of like Noah from the Notebook, of like,
yeah,
I'm gonna fall off this fucking Ferris wheel until you tell me that you're gonna date me. Um, Rather than controlling and disrespectful. And I find this super problematic because it really normalizes coercion and distance as, like, signs of true love rather than red flags. Can you tell me what you think about this?
absolutely. That's exactly what it is. And this is years long. Like he's refused to sign them, while she's there for the 1 week that she's there. But yeah, this has been 7 years of him refusing. And I think that's very common for people to drag out these, litigious aspects of ending relationships. And I think that, reflects reality in a lot of ways. That even once you decide that, I don't want my life entwined with this person at all, you're still forced to by institutions in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and what did you kind of think about his general demeanor and, like, the way that they were kind of talking to each other in like, the beginning when she first gets to his house, and the way that he, like, throws his beer can when he's pissed that she takes his money, like, was it as triggering for you as it was for me, this yelling?
Yeah, I mean, he's so dramatic, and yeah, the moving things like objects physically in like any kind of aggressive way really stresses me out. So yes, that does bother me. I do feel like the tone shifts throughout the movie and takes on this more, playful, more childlike acceptance, which I uh, think is part of their relationship as well as this, combative, part that we see, in that scene.
Yeah, I do think, like, when they kind of go to these, like, group events together, or, like, we see that she finally finds out about his glass company. And I think, like, once she, like, kind of makes a fool of herself at the bar and is, like, really being rude to, like, all these people who she grew up with, and she's very resentful of her past. And I think that, once he really sees that and sees her for maybe like who she is in that way, that's when he decides to sign the divorce papers. And then that's when, though, she kind of chases back after him. Like, did you kind of catch that tone shift
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well?
She's like, "Wait, no, that's not who I am. You have to know that's not who I am." She's, like, still seeking, that approval because obviously, it is hard to go back into situations of your past where you have interacted with people in ways that you aren't, proud of, or you have, relationships that no longer serve you, and that kind of stuff. So I think that's realistic to show.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately, when she finds out that he has his own glass company and he is kind of inspired by her and by their experiences, like hanging out together as kids and being like, true loves as kids, in order to kind of feel like, oh, like this is someone who I actually do want to be with, because he does take care of himself and he, is somebody who is going to have ambition. And I don't know, what did you think of like her finding out about his company?
I was just irritated by that whole thing. I was just like, "Just tell her." Like, I don't I don't like a secret. I don't know. I think I understand, I guess, why he didn't want her to know, but it's also like, be proud of this be proud of this thing. It's, like, okay to I don't know. It's okay for her to know, and she should know. Like, there shouldn't be this element of hiding yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if I owned a fucking glass company at 25, I'd be like, okay. And if I, was a fashion designer and was just up and coming on a cover of a magazine at 25, I'd be like, okay, I really have made it. So you've been with your boo for a while and the spark feels like it's kind of gone. But what if I told you I could take away the mental load of figuring out how to, quote, spice things up by doing the work for you and sending you everything you need? That's where Aria comes in. They set you up with a dedicated concierge, aka a real person, not a robot, who is available anytime you need them, and sends tips and tricks weekly, as well as a monthly box of goods based on your needs sent directly and discreetly to your door to help you get started. Visit arya.fyi and use code SEXEDWITHDB for 15% off now. Let's get that spark back. Let's talk about vacation sex. If you're like me, I bet you want a little pleasure while you're away, but can't fit your entire sex toy collection in your carry-on, huh? Say hello to the brand new Magic Wand Micro. Born into such a famous family, this little wand has quite a reputation to uphold while fitting in the palm of your hand. Same magic, now in pocket size. Use code SEXEDWITHDB at Lion's Den for 15% off your Magic Wand Micro now.
Vanderpump Robs is the reality TV podcast that is worth your time. Sure, you could scroll through the same recycled social media takes, but on Vanderpump Robs, I do things a little differently. I break down Bravo's biggest shows like Southern Hospitality, The Valley, Summer House, Southern Charm, and of course Vanderpump Rules. And I do it through a cultural and comedic lens, because reality TV isn't just about guilty pleasures, it's a funhouse mirror of the society that watches it. So if you're into sharp analysis with just the right amount of snark and no silly voices, subscribe to Vanderpump Robs wherever you get your podcasts. And for bonus and ad-free content, join Vanderpump Robs Premium at patreon.com/VanderpumpRobs.
Transitioning here to the next like big problematic element, this myth of quote unquote the one, right? Like Jake and Melanie are meant to be simply because they have history, regardless of how much they've changed. They really don't know each other anymore, even though they knew each other from when they were younger. And, Melanie's relationship with Andrew is kind of written off as inauthentic because it isn't destined to be. She
Mhm.
says on the aisle, I gave my heart away a long time ago and I never got it back.
Yeah,
And she didn't know that until she didn't sign the divorce papers and sent them in.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so what do you think about this?
Yeah, so they're destined to be in another way, of being star-crossed lovers, like, it was never gonna work, like, he's from the North, she's from the South, like,
Right.
they're trying to create this, they can't be together. It's too culturally, wild for them to be together.
The idea that relationships are not about fate and they're about compatibility, effort, communication, trust, love, attraction. There are so many other pieces to this. And yeah, I really do think that ultimately this film does have a lot of positives, but I think like the way that Jake is portrayed to be this like macho person who's yelling and who's being manipulative and refusing to sign divorce papers, like definitely felt triggering for me as a kid of divorce, of just watching this and be like, I do not like the way that they are talking to each other. Like anger is kind of like, and passion is kind of equivalent to love. And I think that part of it made me really feel unwell about this film, especially as an adult, with the rewatch.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that way about the idea of a true self and, like, that you have to come back to the people who know your true self and that true self is your old self, your
Mm,
child self, and, that's not the case, like, our self goes through tons of permutations and, like, that's okay, you don't have to go back to the original to be genuine and to
right,
be authentic, yeah.
right, and I think the whole accent thing is really funny.
Yeah.
Like, when she's in New York, she, like, doesn't have an accent, and then when she goes home, she's like, "This is where I grew up in my hometown." And he's like,
Yeah.
"What? Who are you?" It's a little much.
It just seems like it would take a lot of effort to monitor
Yes.
your voice that
It's like
much.
a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of situation. Okay, Becca, we're going to transition here to our cringe corner. So, one part of the film or a character or a line or a moment and that you basically find incredibly cringy. And I think mine is when Melanie like outs Bobby Ray in the bar. I think that like she does apologize for it later, but I think that he has been kind of nothing but supportive of her and like gets defensive when she's being really rude to all of their friends. But I think that to me as an adult watching that feels like one of the roughest parts of the film.
Absolutely, like, I read that as, incredibly, emotionally violent, for her to do, and she knows exactly what that will do, although she is wrong because his friends, rally around him and are like, "We appreciate you as you are, this is not, an issue for us," but she's trying to inflict, the opposite of that on him to distract from herself, and I find that really, yeah, really gross.
Yeah. Do you have a
Yeah.
different cringy moment?
Yeah, my cringe moment is actually, like, in the same, general scene, but it's when, his 2 friends are, like, doing this Melanie sandwich, Melanie taco
Right.
thing, and, like, I find this, like, really, really viscerally, like, gross, like, get away from me, like, not wanting to be touched by these men that are, like, allegedly showing affection, but that's, not wanted affection, not wanted attention, and I find that, uh, very cringe. So, yeah, the whole bar scene is hard is
It
a
was all
hard
very bad.
it's a hard watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, luckily enough, we get to rewrite a part of this film or a scene or a character. And I'm curious for you, how would you tell this story today? Like, would you rewrite, the scene at the bar? Would you rewrite kind of this idea of like small town and city life are opposites? Would you rewrite any part of Jake's angry character? Like, what if you could rewrite something, what would you do?
I would like a little bit more about her career, like, how she made this jump from, okay, heading to New York City by herself, she's, 20 years old or whatever, and then she makes a name for herself and becomes this fashion designer. I would like to know more about that arc. because it is like it's a huge arc. I'm curious about that. I would like to know uh more about that detail of her life.
Totally. And, like, I think it's weird that, like, her parents haven't visited her in so long, and she's like, "You guys were supposed to visit me last year, like, why didn't you come?" Like, clearly she, like, wants them to see her life, and they're so reticent to, like, be with her. I don't know, it's just a very
Yeah, I mean, there are a
strange.
lot of shortcomings from her parents, and, like, obviously they love her, very much, that's obvious, but yeah, I mean, they let her down.
I would rewrite the misogyny and machismo of Jake's character, and instead of her sending the divorce papers back over and over again, her finding out that there was a clerical error and that she's no longer divorced. Like, I think we could have reached the same place by just, someone contacting her, or by her kind of contacting, just, double checking that the divorce was final, and that someone saying like, "No, actually you are still married." And so, maybe even then Jake would have the right to kind of feel like, "Oh, I'm like pissed at you for coming back here talking to me about this. You left me like without, there's some
Right.
way to do that where instead of him being a raging asshole and not, refusing to sign the divorce papers, there could have just been some sort of error, and that we could have gotten to the same way, and he wouldn't have to be so nasty to her, I don't think.
Yeah, that's so smart. I love that. I would enjoy it a lot more. More
Right?
that way. Yeah, without this element of coercion and, uh, yeah,
Pretty
control.
simple.
Being unwilling to let go of someone who no
Right.
longer wants to be with you. Yeah.
Ugh, I gotta contact the writer for a rewrite. We're doing it again, people. Okay, we are towards the end here of our interview, and I would love to hear you rate the film after revisiting it. What's your post-watch rom-com vom rating?
I think I'm still at a 2. I think my original assessment still stands for me. I think that there is some good here. There's, a lot of bad, but you fixed it with the end there. With this rewrite.
Yeah.
I can appreciate it
Yeah,
in the present context more.
yeah, I think because of, like, how great I feel like the friend group is and all the great parts about it, I'll move mine down to a 2.5. It has zero point 0.5 less bombs. I think that, I'm still very angry about, like, the way that Jake is so pissed off and so manipulative and so controlling and emotionally
Mhm,
abusive to her, and I think that essentially is my whole whole of the 2.5 rating.
mhm.
And so, yeah, that's my final rating, but in case you were curious about those trivia teaser deets from earlier, Sweet Home Alabama was the first movie allowed to film inside of Tiffany's legendary flagship store since the Breakfast at Tiffany's movie in 1961, but they were only allowed to film on the outside. And so I don't know what the director or whoever was a part of this film of Sweet Home Alabama was able to get indoors, because that scene, we didn't even talk about that scene, but I, as a kid, loved that scene. I was like,
Oh, I
he's
mean,
just
yeah,
letting her pick her engagement ring?
it's opulent. I
Oh,
mean, it's just extravagant.
it is gorgeous. I mean, I feel like it definitely informed my thoughts around, "Oh, this is what a man who wants to marry you is supposed to do, is just take you to a jewelry store and let you fucking pick your ring."
Right, but this is another thing, like, with Andrew, where I'm like, "You know what? Like, yeah, he's nice in this external way, but it's like she just had this huge win at work. He wants to make it about their engagement." And it's like,
You're so right.
proposing to someone at someone else's wedding or, like, something like that. I'm just like,
Let
"Why
her
does
have
it have
this
to
one.
be today?" And,
You're so
like,
right,
right before
Becca.
you're gonna go see your mother? I don't
Wow.
know. I don't know. I don't know what it is now, but I'm kind of like, "I have your number,
You're
Patrick Dempsey."
You're correct. Wow, that is wild. That is so fantastic. Um, Coming up next week, she's won Oscars, played queens, witches, chefs, and fashion editors, but this rom-com marked a career first for Meryl Streep. Stick around to find out what she'd never done on screen until this movie. Join our IG broadcast channel to share your guesses. And if you have a rom-com that you remember from growing up that you want us to cover, submit it to us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and leaving a comment on Spotify. Becca, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find you and check out your amazing baking/abortion and repro healthcare content?
Yeah, so the best place to find me is on Substack, and it's the sweetfeminist.substack.com. And I also have a link tree that is available through there as well. But I have a new book called The Abortion Companion coming out in October. So
Hey.
that's exciting, and it's available for pre-order now. So that'd be great if you're
Check it
looking
out.
for a book to pre-order.
Great. Thank you so much for being here, Becca.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Our creator, host, and executive producer is me, Danielle Bezalel, aka DB. Our producer is Sadie Leegee. Our communications lead is Catherine Cohen. Our music theme is by Hook Sounds. Thanks so much to our featured guests, partners, and listeners. If you have a rom-com you remember from growing up and want us to cover it on Rom-Com Bomb, submit it to us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and leaving a comment on Spotify. Want to partner with us? Email us at sexedwithdb@gmail.com. For more sex ed content, follow us on Instagram @sexedwithdbpodcast. See you next time.